George Harris stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, an ivory envelope clenched in his fist. The embossed lettering seemed to mock him with every glance. Vivian Caldwell cordially invites you. 3 years. 3 years since she'd walked away, choosing security over strength, a rival's connections over his alpha dominance. Unbelievable, he muttered, tossing the invitation onto the marble counter where it landed with a sharp slap. His assistant, Marcus, glanced up from his tablet. You're not seriously considering going? George's jaw tightened. And let her think I'm still licking my wounds? That I'm some discarded memory she can pity? He shook his head. I won't give her that satisfaction. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Then bring someone. Show her you've evolved beyond what she threw away. The suggestion hung in the air, but it couldn't be just anyone. Vivian would see through mediocrity in a heartbeat. He needed someone who would make her question everything, someone unforgettable enough to haunt her long after the champagne went flat. That night, as George left a late business meeting, the idea still consumed him. He walked past the gleaming storefronts of the financial district when movement caught his eye. She sat on the cold sidewalk, back against a shuttered cafe, knees drawn up. Her curls were tangled and wild, grime streaked across her jacket, but it was her eyes that stopped him. They didn't beg. They didn't plead. They challenged. Like the city had thrown everything at her, and she'd refused to break. Her posture was all wrong for someone in her position. Too straight, too proud. Even in mismatched shoes and a torn jacket, she sat like she was holding court on a throne. George slowed, something primal stirring in his chest. He approached, hands sliding into the pockets of his tailored coat. You need money. Her gaze lifted, sharp and assessing. She studied him the way a jeweler examines a stone, looking for flaws, calculating value. Then her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Is this your charity quota for the month? Drop some cash, feel noble, sleep better? George's eyebrows rose. No one spoke to him like that. I'm offering you an opportunity, he said evenly. Enough money to change your circumstances. All you have to do is clean up and accompany me to an event. She laughed a low, bitter sound. So, you package salvation like a corporate merger? That's original. Are you interested or not? She stood, brushing dirt from her threadbare clothes. Up close, he could see the defiance burning in her eyes, the kind that came from surviving things that should have destroyed her. She was smaller than he'd expected, but the way she closed the distance between them radiated power. I'll do it, she said, voice cool as winter rain. But not for your money. Then why? That dangerous smile returned. Curiosity. I want to see how far an alpha like you is willing to go. Before we continue, I've noticed that many of you enjoy watching my videos but haven't subscribed yet. Please help support and grow this channel by liking the video, dropping a comment, and subscribing if you enjoy the stories. Thank you so much. Now let's get back to the story. The ride through the city was silent, but charged. George sat beside her in his black sedan, unable to stop stealing glances. The woman, who still hadn't offered her name, gazed out at the passing lights with eerie calm, like luxury was nothing new to her. You're not going to ask where we're headed, he finally said. She turned slowly, that subtle smirk playing at her lips. Somewhere expensive, I'd guess. Somewhere you need to prove something. You're not concerned? She shrugged. You pull me off the street and offer me money to play dress up. That's already strange enough. But I doubt you're planning anything sinister. You have too much to lose. Despite himself, George almost smiled. It's a wedding. Her expression sharpened, reading something in the set of his shoulders, the tension in his voice. Your ex is getting married. It wasn't a question. George's hands tightened on his knee. You're perceptive. And you're transparent. She angled toward him, eyes glinting with recognition. This isn't about showing up with someone beautiful. This is war. For the first time in 3 years, George felt something other than rage when thinking about Vivian's betrayal. This woman, this stranger pulled from the shadows, saw through him in seconds. She understood the game, without needing the rules explained. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, just for a breath. "Yuri." "Well, Yuri," George said, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. "I hope you're ready for a battlefield." Her smile widened, feral and fierce. "I was born ready." As the city lights streaked past, George couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just invited a storm into his carefully controlled world. But storms, he was beginning to realize, might be exactly what he needed. George hadn't expected to care. The transformation was supposed to be transactional, a necessary polish on his weapon of choice. He'd sent Yuri to his personal stylist with explicit instructions and a black credit card, then bury himself in contracts for 3 hours to avoid thinking about it. When his phone buzzed with a single text, "She's ready," he almost ignored it. Almost. The private suite at Levine's occupied the entire top floor, all mirrors and soft lighting designed to make anyone look like a dream. George stepped off the elevator, straightening his cuffs, prepared to see an improved version of the woman from the street. He wasn't prepared for her. She stood at the far end of the room, backlit by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The stylist had worked a miracle, or perhaps just revealed what had been buried beneath layers of survival. Her hair, no longer tangled and wild, fell in glossy waves that caught the light like dark water. The grime was gone, replaced by skin that seemed to glow with an inner luminosity. But it was her face that stopped him cold. The exhaustion had vanished, lifting a veil he hadn't realized was there. Her features were striking, sharp cheekbones, a mouth that curved with dangerous intelligence, eyes that held depths he couldn't begin to map. She wore a dress of deep emerald that moved like liquid when she turned to face him, the color making her skin luminous. "Will I do?" she asked, but there was no uncertainty in her voice. She knew exactly what she looked like. George's throat went dry. "You'll do." Something flickered across her expression. Amusement, maybe, or vindication. She moved toward him with a grace that seemed innate, not learned. Every step was measured, controlled, the walk of someone who'd once commanded rooms without effort. "You're staring," she observed. "You're unrecognizable." "From the woman on the street?" "I should hope so." She paused inches away, studying his face with that same penetrating gaze. "Though I suspect that's not quite what you meant." He couldn't place it, the nagging sensation that he'd seen her before. Not on the street, but somewhere else. Somewhere that mattered. Her bearing, the way she held her chin, the particular arch of her brow when she was amused, it all whispered of familiarity. "Have we met?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Her smile was a blade wrapped in silk. In another life, perhaps. The stylist approached, breaking the moment. "The shoes and accessories are ready whenever you need them, Mr. Harris." George nodded absently, still caught in Yuri's orbit. She'd undergone more than a physical transformation. The woman before him radiated something the street version had kept carefully hidden. Power, breeding, the kind of presence that came from being raised in rarefied air. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "Tonight?" She reached for the jewelry box the stylist offered, lifting out diamond earrings that probably cost more than most people's cars. She fastened them with practiced ease, then met his eyes in the mirror. "Tonight, I'm whoever you need me to be." But George was beginning to realize he'd made a critical miscalculation. He'd thought he was hiring an actress. Instead, he'd recruited a queen in exile, and he had no idea what game she was really playing. The Ashford estate sprawled across manicured grounds like a monument to excess. String quartets played on the terrace, champagne flowed from crystal fountains, and every surface seemed designed to announce that Vivian Caldwell had won. George's jaw tightened as the valet opened the car door. This was a mistake. Coming here, bringing Yuri, thinking he could somehow breathe. Yuri murmured beside him. She'd changed into midnight blue for the evening ceremony, the fabric clinging to her like shadow and starlight. You're supposed to look victorious, not like you're walking to your execution. He offered his arm. She took it with the casual elegance of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, and together they ascended the marble steps. The moment they entered, conversation didn't stop. It fractured. Heads turned in waves, murmurs rippling through the crowd like wind through wheat. George had expected attention. He was still one of the city's most powerful alphas. But the stares weren't for him. They were for her. Yuri moved through the crowd with devastating poise, her hand light on his arm, her expression serene. But George felt the shift in the room, the way people leaned together whispering, the way eyes widened in recognition or confusion or something darker. George Harris. The voice cut through the murmur like a knife through silk. Vivian materialized from the crowd in her wedding white, a vision of calculated perfection. Her smile was wide, practiced, but her eyes locked onto Yuri with an intensity that made George's instincts flare. "I'm so glad you could make it," Vivian continued, though her attention never left his companion. "And you've brought someone." Yuri's smile was a masterpiece of casual menace. "Vivian Caldwell. Or should I say, soon-to-be Vivian Harrington? Congratulations on your strategic alliance." The words landed like a slap. Vivian's perfect facade cracked for just a moment, a flicker of something sharp and panicked crossing her face before she recovered. "I don't believe we've met. Haven't we?" Yuri tilted her head, and George saw it then, the predator beneath the polish. "Perhaps not. I imagine you meet so many people in your line of work. Some of them must simply blur together." Vivian's hand tightened on her champagne flute. "I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name." "Yuri." She let the name hang in the air, weighted with meaning George didn't understand. But Vivian did. The color drained from her face so quickly it looked like someone had pulled a plug. "That's not possible," Vivian whispered. "And yet." Yuri's smile widened, arctic and unforgiving. "Here I am." Around them, the crowd sensed blood in the water. Conversations died completely now, all attention fixed on the bride who'd gone statue still and the woman in midnight blue, who looked like she'd just won a war. George's ex-fiancée, the woman who'd always been unshakable, took a step backward. "You're supposed to be dead? Destroyed? Disappeared." Yuri finished, her voice carrying just enough to reach the nearest guests. "Yes, I imagine that's what you were told. But I've always been difficult to bury, Vivian. You should have remembered that." The reception hall glittered with old money and older ambitions. George sat beside Yuri at a table carefully positioned to maximize visibility, Vivian's doing no doubt. A final twist of the knife to ensure everyone saw him watching her marry someone else. But the knife had turned in an unexpected direction. Vivian's new husband, Richard Harrington, stood to give his toast. He was exactly what George expected, silver-haired, distinguished, the kind of man who spoke in quarterly earnings and legacy trusts. Safe. Predictable. Everything George wasn't. "To my beautiful bride," Richard began, raising his glass. "Who brings not just beauty, but brilliance to our union." Vivian's insights into emerging markets have already proven invaluable to Harrington Industries. Polite applause rippled through the room. George's grip tightened on his champagne flute. Then Yuri stood. The movement was fluid, unhurried, but it commanded attention like a thunderclap. Every eye in the room turned to her. She lifted her glass, that dangerous smile playing at her lips. "If I may," she said, her voice carrying effortlessly across the hall, "I'd like to add my own congratulations." Vivian's smile froze. Richard looked bemused. George's heart hammered against his ribs. It's truly inspiring, Yuri continued, to see such a strategic merger come to fruition. After all, market consolidation is the name of the game these days, isn't it? Absorb the competition, liquidate the assets, rebrand the losses as growth. She paused, her gaze finding Vivian. I believe that's the Harrington Industries model, correct? A murmur swept through the alpha businessmen at the surrounding tables. Richard's smile thinned. Though I do wonder, Yuri mused, swirling her champagne, about the due diligence process. When acquiring new partnerships, it's crucial to examine the books thoroughly. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, creative accounting practices. The SEC has been so particular lately about corporate transparency. The murmur became a buzz. George recognized several board members from rival companies leaning forward, suddenly very interested. Vivian stood, her knuckles white against the table. I don't know what you're implying. Implying? Yuri's eyebrows rose with theatrical innocence. I'm simply admiring your business acumen. The way you restructured the Meridian acquisition last year, for instance. Brilliant how those pension funds vanished just before the merger finalized. Very efficient. Though I hear the federal auditors found it interesting. Richard's face had gone from confusion to alarm. What is she talking about, Vivian? She's lying, Vivian hissed, but her voice shook. Yuri took a delicate sip of champagne. Am I? Because I seem to recall a certain architect, brilliant man really, who questioned those same accounting irregularities. Publicly, in fact. What was his name? She tapped her chin thoughtfully. Oh yes, Alexander Volkov. He raised quite a few concerns about market manipulation and fraud before his firm mysteriously collapsed. His reputation destroyed by a media campaign that traced back to… Where was it? Ah yes, a PR firm on retainer with Harrington Industries. The silence that followed was absolute. George stared at Yuri, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Volkov. He'd heard that name before. A scandal 3 years ago, an architect accused of embezzlement who'd lost everything. But if Yuri knew these details, if she spoke with this particular venom… My father, Yuri said softly, but every word cut like glass, sends his regards from his grave. He would have loved to see this day. Vivian's champagne flute shattered against the floor. George left Yuri at the hotel suite without a word. The ride back had been silent, charged with a fury he couldn't quite name. She'd played him, used him like a chess piece to execute her own revenge, and he'd been too blind to see it. His office at 3 a.m. was exactly as he'd left it, cold, efficient, designed for conquest. He pulled up every file he could find on Alexander Volkov. The story unfolded across his screens like a tragedy in 3 acts. Volkov had been a visionary architect, responsible for some of the city's most iconic structures. But 3 years ago, allegations of embezzlement and fraud had surfaced. Corporate accounts drained, pension funds missing, clients left with nothing but lawsuits and broken promises. The media had crucified him. Every outlet ran the same narrative: brilliant man brought low by greed. The firm collapsed within weeks. Volkov's name became synonymous with corruption. He died 6 months later. Heart attack, the obituary said. George knew better. Men like Volkov didn't die from heart attacks. They died from having everything stripped away. George dug deeper, pulling financial records that required passwords he shouldn't have. The paper trail was meticulous, too meticulous. Every accusation, every leaked document, every damning headline traced back to a single PR firm. The same firm Vivian had used when she'd launched her own consulting business. His hands stilled on the keyboard. Vivian had destroyed Volkov. Systematically, deliberately, using her connections at Harrington Industries to fabricate evidence and bury the truth. But why? The answer came in a decades-old contract dispute. Volkov had been contracted for the Harrington Tower expansion. He'd discovered accounting irregularities, the same offshore schemes and shell corporations Yuri had mentioned at the wedding. When he'd threatened to go public, Vivian had made him the villain instead. George leaned back in his chair, the pieces finally forming a complete picture. Yuri Volkov, not just a woman he'd found on the street. The daughter of a man murdered by reputation, living in the ruins of her father's legacy. She hadn't been homeless by chance, she'd been erased, just like her father. Every connection severed, every opportunity destroyed by the same machine that had crushed Alexander Volkov. And George had been her ticket back into that world. His phone buzzed. "Marcus, you need to see the morning news." George pulled up the live stream. Every major outlet was running the same story. Federal investigators reopening the Volkov case based on new evidence. Vivian's face flashed across the screen, her expression carefully neutral as reporters shouted questions about fraud and corporate conspiracy. The hotel suite was empty when he returned. Yuri's midnight blue dress lay draped across the chair, a pair of diamond earrings beside it, the ones he'd given her for the wedding. Everything else was gone. On the nightstand, a single note in elegant script. "Thank you for the ride. You were exactly what I needed." George crushed the paper in his fist. She'd used him perfectly, his name, his connections, his vendetta against Vivian to orchestrate her own revenge. She'd manipulated him from the moment he'd found her on that sidewalk, and he'd been too arrogant to see it. But as fury burned through his chest, something else burned alongside it. Admiration, respect, and beneath it all, something far more dangerous that he refused to name. She'd played him, yes, but she'd played Vivian better. And despite everything, George wanted her back. Vivian's counterattack came 48 hours after the wedding, swift and surgical as a blade between ribs. George watched the press conference from his office, jaw clenched as Vivian stood before a wall of cameras looking every inch the wounded victim. Her lawyer flanked her left side, Richard her right, a united front against persecution. "These allegations are nothing more than a smear campaign," Vivian said, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "Orchestrated by a woman with a history of mental instability and criminal behavior. The person calling herself Yuri Volkov is actually Yuri Volkov-Sokolov, who was institutionalized for 3 years following a violent breakdown." George's blood went cold. "She's been living under various aliases," Vivian continued, "harassing my family, spreading lies, and manipulating vulnerable men into financing her delusions." Her gaze found the camera, and George felt the accusation like a physical blow. "I have documentation proving that Ms. Volkov has fabricated evidence, stolen identities, and engaged in extortion. She is not a victim. She is dangerous." The screen filled with documents, medical records, police reports, photographs of a younger Yuri with wild eyes and hospital wristbands. Each one stamped with official seals, each one damning. Marcus entered without knocking. "It's already spreading. Every outlet is running with the mental illness angle. By tonight, Yuri Volkov will be a cautionary tale about conspiracy theorists and jilted daughters." "Where is she?"
No idea.
"She's gone dark. No phone, no credit cards, no." "Find her." George's phone buzzed with an unknown number. He answered without thinking. Impressive, isn't it? Yuri's voice was steady, but he heard the undercurrent of rage. She had those documents ready. Probably commissioned them the moment she realized I was still alive. "Where are you?" "Does it matter? By morning, I'll be a crazy woman who seduced a billionaire to fuel my father's delusions. She's already one. The hell she has." George grabbed his coat. "Tell me where you are." Silence stretched between them. Then, quietly, "Why? I used to, remember? I'm exactly what she says I am, a liar, a manipulator. Everything you hate." "You're a survivor," George said. And you were right about Vivian. The federal investigation is real. The evidence is real. But she's burying it under your supposed insanity, and if we don't move now, she'll bury both of us. There is no us, George. This was always my fight. It became mine the moment she sent me that wedding invitation. He stepped into the elevator, his voice dropping to something darker, more primal. You wanted to see how far I'd go. I'm showing you. Another silence. When Yuri spoke again, her voice was different. Raw, stripped of its usual armor. The Riverside Warehouse. District 9. I've been collecting evidence for 3 years. Bank records, communications, witness testimonies. Everything Vivian buried about my father's case. I'll be there in 20 minutes. George.
She paused.
She'll destroy you too. Your reputation, your business, everything. Association with me is poison now. He smiled, though she couldn't see it. Then we'll be poisonous together. The warehouse was exactly the kind of place someone would hide when the world turned against them. Abandoned, anonymous, forgotten. George found Yuri in a makeshift office constructed from shipping crates and desperation. Cork boards covered every surface, photographs and documents connected by red string like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. Except it wasn't a fever dream. It was meticulous, methodical evidence of corporate fraud spanning decades. Yuri sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, her hair pulled back, wearing jeans and a jacket that had seen better years. She looked nothing like the woman who dismantled Vivian at the wedding. She looked exhausted. Human. This is what I've become, she said without looking up. Living in warehouses, chasing ghosts, talking to myself. Maybe Vivian's right. Maybe I am crazy. George crouched beside her, examining the nearest board. Offshore account transfers. Emails discussing pension fund reallocation. A photograph of his own signature on a contract he'd never seen. She's been setting me up too, he realized. For months. You were her contingency plan, the powerful alpha she could frame if things went wrong. That's why she sent the wedding invitation. She wanted you there, wanted you angry enough to make mistakes. Yuri finally met his eyes.
I'm sorry.
I thought I was using you, but we were both her pawns. George settled onto the floor beside her, shoulders touching in the cold space. Outside, the city hummed with the story of Yuri's supposed madness spreading through every channel, every platform, every whispered conversation. Then we stop being pawns, he said. And we end her. Together. Yuri's hand found his in the darkness. Together, she echoed. And for the first time since the wedding, George felt something shift between them, from transaction to partnership, from manipulation to trust. They were both wounded, both played, both furious. But together, they were something Vivian hadn't counted on. They were unstoppable. The Harrington Club occupied the top 3 floors of the Sinclair Tower, a monument to exclusivity where memberships were inherited and scandals were buried beneath Persian rugs and discretion. Crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across rooms filled with a kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. Yuri walked through the entrance alone, wearing simple black that made her look like a shadow among the glittering elite. Every eye tracked her movement. The infamous woman from the wedding, the unstable daughter, now daring to show her face in the one place she had no right to be. The invitation had come that morning, embossed with Vivian's initials. Let's end this civilized. Private room, 8 p.m. Come alone. It was obviously a trap. That's why Yuri had accepted. The private salon was all crystal and cold elegance, chandeliers dripping light like frozen tears. Vivian waited at the far end, perfectly composed in cream silk, a glass of scotch in her hand. You came. Vivian's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. I wasn't sure you would. Then again, you've always been reckless. Your father had the same problem. Yuri closed the door behind her, the click echoing through the empty room. You wanted to talk. So talk. I want to make you an offer. Vivian set down her glass. $5 million. A new identity. A life somewhere far from here, where no one knows the Volkov name. All you have to do is disappear. Like I did the first time? You were supposed to stay disappeared. The institution was meant to keep you safe, keep you quiet. But you escaped, and now you're making a nuisance of yourself. Vivian's mask slipped, showing the predator beneath. I won't let you destroy what I've built. What you stole, you mean. Yuri moved deeper into the room, her footsteps silent on the marble. My father's work, his reputation, his life. You took everything and called it business. Your father was weak. He let morality interfere with profit. I did what needed to be done. You framed him, manufactured evidence, paid witnesses to lie. Then when he threatened to expose you, you had him committed and destroyed what was left of his firm. Yuri's voice remained steady, but fury blazed beneath each word. He died believing the world thought he was a thief. Vivian shrugged, the gesture obscene in its casualness. He should have taken the money I offered him.
Just like you should take this offer now.
Because if you don't, she pulled out her phone, tapping the screen. I have reporters waiting downstairs. One call, and they'll document your unhinged invasion of a private club, your harassment of a respected businesswoman. It will be the final proof everyone needs that you're exactly what I've said you are. Then make the call. I'm trying to be generous, Yuri. Don't mistake mercy for weakness. I don't. Yuri smiled, and it was the same dangerous expression she'd worn on the sidewalk where George first found her. I just know something you don't. And what's that? You're already finished. The door opened behind them. George stepped through, flanked by Marcus and 3 federal agents. But it was what George carried that made Vivian's face drain of color, a leather portfolio thick with documents.
No, Vivian whispered.
George moved to stand beside Yuri, his presence solid and unwavering. The bank records you thought were destroyed? The offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands? The communications between you and your co-conspirators? He set the portfolio on the nearest table with a decisive thud. We found them. All of them. That's impossible. I had everything scrubbed, encrypted. You had everything except loyalty. Marcus stepped forward. Your assistant, Karen? The one you fired last month? She kept copies. Insurance, she called it. Turns out, she was willing to share once we explained what those files really proved. The lead agent, a woman with gray-streaked hair and eyes like flint, produced a badge. Vivian Caldwell, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, and accessory to wrongful death in the case of Alexander Volkov. This is ridiculous. I have lawyers who are currently being questioned about their role in falsifying Yuri Volkov's medical records. The agent's smile was thin. You're thorough, Miss Caldwell.
So are we.
As the agents moved to cuff her, Vivian's composure finally shattered. She looked at Yuri with pure venom. You think you've won? You'll always be the crazy daughter of a disgraced architect. No one will remember anything else. Yuri stepped closer, her voice dropping to something only Vivian could hear. My father's name will be cleared. His work will be remembered. And you. She smiled. You'll be the cautionary tale mothers tell their daughters about ambition without conscience. Vivian lunged, but the agents caught her, pulling her back as she screamed threats that dissolved into incoherence. George's hand found Yuri's as they watched Vivian being led away, her empire crumbling with every step. It's over, he said quietly. Yuri leaned into him, exhaustion finally catching up. It's over. Outside, cameras flashed as Vivian was escorted to a waiting car. Tomorrow, the headlines would tell a different story. Not of a crazy woman's delusions, but of justice served and corruption exposed. And in a room of crystal chandeliers, 2 wounded souls stood together, no longer alone. 6 months after Vivian's arrest, the financial district still whispered about the Harrington collapse. The empire had imploded spectacularly. Stock prices plummeted, board members resigned, and Richard Harrington filed for divorce before the indictments were even finalized. Vivian herself awaited trial in a facility far less comfortable than the institutions she'd used to bury her enemies. But George wasn't thinking about Vivian as he stood in his penthouse, the same place where this had all begun with an ivory envelope and wounded pride. Yuri sat by the window, bathed in afternoon light, reading through architectural plans. Her father's firm had been posthumously cleared, his reputation restored through a series of articles detailing his brilliance and the conspiracy that had destroyed him. Several of his unfinished projects were being completed in his honor, and Yuri had taken it upon herself to see them through. She looked different now. Not the grime-streaked woman from the sidewalk, not the calculated weapon from the wedding. Just Yuri whole, healing home. "I have something for you," George said. She looked up, eyebrows raised. "If it's another diamond necklace, I'm going to throw it at you. I still haven't worn the last one." He smiled, pulling a single key from his pocket. It was simple, unremarkable, attached to a leather fob with coordinates engraved on its surface. Yuri took it, turning it over in her palm. "What is this?" "Our future, if you want it." She met his eyes, and he saw everything there. The question, the hope, the lingering fear that this was temporary. That he'd wake up one day and realize she was too complicated, too damaged, too much. "It's a house," he continued, "on a quiet beach about 2 hours north.
No negurs, no reporters, no ghosts.
Just us." He paused, then pulled out a small velvet box. "And whatever we choose to build there." The ring inside was elegant and understated, a single sapphire the color of midnight surrounded by diamonds. Yuri's breath caught. "George, I'm not asking because you helped me get revenge. I'm not asking because we make a good team, though we do. I'm asking because somewhere between that sidewalk and this moment, you became the only person I want to wake up next to for the rest of my life." He took her hand. "Marry me, not as a business deal or a social statement. Marry me because you love me the way I love you." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling.
Yes.
"Yes, you impossible alpha. Yes." They married on that quiet beach 3 months later. No crowds, no photographers, no society pages to document the union. Just them, the ocean, and a handful of people who'd helped them survive their war. Yuri wore simple white, her hair loose in the sea breeze. George had never seen anything more beautiful. "You're staring," she murmured as they exchanged vows. "Get used to it." A year later, George stood in the nursery they'd built together, watching Yuri rock their daughter. The baby had her mother's dark curls and her father's fierce determination, making her presence known from the moment she entered the world. "What should we name her?" Yuri had asked in the hospital, exhausted and radiant. George had looked at his wife, his queen, his equal, the woman who'd risen from the ashes of her father's destroyed legacy to build something unshakable. He thought about everything they'd survived, everything they'd fought for, everything they'd become.
"Hope," he said.
"We name her Hope." Yuri had smiled through tears, understanding immediately. Hope for the future they'd claimed. Hope for the healing they'd found. Hope that the darkness they'd both carried for so long could finally give way to light. Now, watching them together in the golden afternoon sun, George felt something he'd never expected to feel again after Vivian's betrayal.
Peace.
The war was over. The ghosts were laid to rest. And in their place was something infinitely more powerful. A family, a future, a love that had been forged in fire and emerged unbreakable. His queen, his daughter, his home. If you enjoyed this story and want more like it, please like the video, drop a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support truly means the world to me and helps this channel grow. Thank you for being here.